There's no political will to do much at all to Medicare. It's a third rail. You can't really talk about eliminating fee-for-service. But we're seeing under the radar real changes happening with Medicaid. We're getting rid of fee-for-service. You just mentioned how we might see other states motivated to follow Massachusetts. What if you get every state or many states changing fee-for-service to bundled payments? Then you get Walmart and big employers going to bundled payments to the did you see them? The biggest employer said to the Cleveland Clinic, you take our patients, we'll give you a lump sum fee to treat cardiac and spine surgery. That's huge. Yeah. You see these other changes going on, getting rid of fee-for-service, and yeah, you may have Medicare as the outlier because the politicians won't change it.
Medicare's 27% capitated.
Do you see a scenario where when the budget just becomes unsustainable for $2.8 trillion and $3 trillion, where you're going to start seeing various ways to get rid of fee-for-service?
I absolutely do, and I think Medicare will be the last to get there. There's certainly Medicare managed care today, and it's a thriving business, but you're right, that conversation about it is difficult, and the difference is...
The politicians won't do it, the market forces will do it.
The market forces will do it, and the difference is, we said, there's 50 states that have different Medicaid programs, and there's not an AARP equivalent that's going to run TV ads or another equivalent that's going to make people nervous about changes in their Medicare benefit on the Medicaid side.
Poor people don't have AARP. So
so the three big populations of Medicaid, and I think you're right, we're getting more capitation. Most states are getting more managed care. There is going to be a squeeze for the better on taking care of what we consider to be traditional health care for women and kids and families. That's happening, and that's probably the most efficiencies are. Another third is the disabled community, which is really expensive per capita, a whole different thing I won't get into. But the third, which is way overdue for change, and it's a third of the problem, is nursing home care. And I'll bet you everybody watching this
How bipartisan is this? How many Republicans and Democrats agree that we need to get rid of fee-for-service and change everything you just mentioned?
The worst thing about it is the number of people that really understand this, and the Republican Party and the Democratic Party combined, is I wouldn't have to take off my shoes to count them. And that's the biggest problem, because I think I'm an old guy. 15 years ago, there were dozens of Republicans and Democrats, the John Chafees, the Bob Kerry, a lot of guys who really get into the weeds on health care, Bill Thomas, who retired. There just aren't as many, the best guy in Congress on health care, in my opinion, today is Ron Wyden, who's a liberal Democrat from Oregon. He understands it, and he really cares about it. I wish we had 20.
Aren't there more doctors in Congress, though? I've lost track of all the doctors.
No, there's a bunch of docs, and there's some very good ones. A guy from Georgia who's great. But that they're all in the House for the most part.
Right.
They tend to get, it's pretty partisan over there.
Well, let's try to get a little more actionable with stocks and so forth here.
But like most people on my Democratic friends, they get carried away, and they, when you get a giant deficit, this is the single biggest factor. And if President Obama gets reelected, I believe this thing will be delayed anyway, purely for budget reasons, for a year or so. And if Romney gets elected, it'll probably, I don't know if they'll repeal it, but they'll delay it for a decade.
But how can this be the driving factor when CBO scores repealing the ACA is adding to the deficit?
Because that's such a silly thing. You don't want to get into that. Normally, all the cuts that paid for the president's bill, all the tax increases, all the Medicare cuts, all the Medicaid cuts, I spent years at OMB, would have been used for deficit reduction. If you would look at Bill Clinton, he did in 1997, what I did with George Bush I in 1990. Lots of Medicare cuts and revenue increases. We did it to reduce the deficit. President Obama took those same things and used it to pay for his plan. So he paid for it with all these things that normally go into deficit reduction. So the deficit didn't go down. So if you repeal all the taxes they raised last year and repealed all the Medicare and Medicaid cuts they used to finance this, theoretically the deficit would go up. But that's not going to happen.
Right. But the law as a whole, if you take the whole law away, right? If it never passed, the deficit's
so if I raised your tax and doubled them, and I went and bought a car for being American, I repealed that. If I raised more taxes I paid to buy you a car and I repealed it, theoretically the deficit might be higher. But it's a silly argument.